Schopenhauer knew the truth. The smarter you are, the lonelier you become. The more you understand, the harder it is to connect. Centuries ago, philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer uncovered a brutal paradox. Intelligence doesn't just reveal the world, it can exile you from it. The sharper your mind, the more you see. Hypocrisy, illusions, the uncomfortable truths that people ignore. But society doesn't reward those who point them out. It punishes them. Schopenhauer called it the curse of perception.
I cannot live with you, nor without you. This ancient proverb captures precisely what philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer recognized about the paradox intelligent people face in society. Their minds simultaneously make them valuable to others, yet fundamentally separate from them. Imagine a brilliant mind, like a lighthouse, illuminating surroundings while standing isolated on rocky shores. This isolation isn't imaginary. Schopenhauer identified 4 specific insights that explain why your intelligence might be causing your feelings of separation. These revelations don't indicate personal failure, but rather suggest you're perceiving reality with uncommon clarity. By the end, you'll understand your social experiences in an entirely new light. Have you ever noticed how quickly people label you as arrogant when you question what everyone else simply accepts? It's a strange phenomenon that's followed thoughtful people throughout history. You raise a logical objection to something that doesn't make sense, and suddenly you're seen as looking down on others when all you did was ask a question. Schopenhauer offers us a fascinating perspective on this misunderstanding. Through his concept of the will to life, he reveals why society often mistakes intellectual perception for arrogance. This fundamental force, as Schopenhauer describes it, is a relentless blind impulse driving us towards self-preservation and immediate gratification. It operates beneath our conscious awareness, steering our desires and actions in ways we rarely recognize. Most people, according to Schopenhauer, are primarily operating under this will's influence. They construct social narratives and comfortable illusions that serve their fundamental drives, seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, and preserving their existence. There's nothing wrong with this, it's simply how most of us are wired. We create stories about the world that help us navigate it comfortably. The trouble begins when intellectually curious individuals start questioning these narratives. These thinkers see through the comfortable illusions that most people cling to for emotional survival. Their heightened capacity for critical thinking and pattern recognition enables them to identify inconsistencies that others miss or choose to ignore. Galileo exemplifies this dilemma perfectly. His observations challenged both scientific understanding and the comfortable religious narratives of his time. Imagine him alone at night, peering through his telescope at celestial bodies moving in ways that contradicted everything his society believed, knowing his insights might lead to his persecution. People rejected his ideas because accepting them would require reconstructing their entire worldview. This creates a perception gap. When intellectuals question established narratives, they're processing reality differently, noticing patterns and uncomfortable truths that challenge the status quo. But to those invested in existing narratives, this questioning feels like an attack. Cognitive dissonance intensifies this dynamic. When confronted with contradictory facts, people experience genuine mental discomfort. Rather than changing their minds, they often dismiss the information or attack the messenger as a form of psychological self-preservation. Throughout history, this shoot-the-messenger response has manifested as censorship, social pressure, or attempts to discredit those sharing uncomfortable realities. Labeling someone as arrogant becomes far easier than reconsidering deeply held beliefs. For intellectual individuals, this creates a painful paradox. The very qualities that allow them to see clearly also create barriers between them and others. Their insights are misinterpreted as condescension by those focused on immediate desires and social acceptance. This misunderstanding becomes a genuine psychological burden. Being constantly misinterpreted creates isolation. When honest observations are met with accusations of arrogance, you eventually stop sharing them, furthering your disconnection from others. I've watched people's expressions shift from interest to defensiveness, When I questioned assumptions they held dear, these interactions taught me to be more selective about sharing my thoughts, which only deepened my sense of isolation. Intelligent people often feel like outsiders because they perceive different layers of reality that many prefer to ignore. They see through social conventions to the complex truths beneath. This difference in perception, not superiority, creates social friction. The irony is that what others perceive as arrogance is often a genuine attempt to understand reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Intellectuals aren't looking down on others, they're looking more deeply at the world, sometimes at great personal cost.
Radio Wisdom.
That personal cost can be steep indeed. Perhaps none knew this better than Schopenhauer himself. What if the very intelligence that lets you see through society's illusions is also preventing your happiness? Schopenhauer's own life offers a troubling case study that might make you question whether your perceptiveness is a gift or a burden. Many of us assume that being smart leads directly to a better, happier life. Intelligence helps you solve problems, advance in your career, and understand the world around you. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The relationship between intelligence and happiness is far more complicated than most believe. Schopenhauer's personal journey reveals this disconnect dramatically. He was already gripped by the misery of life. This profound recognition of suffering shaped his entire philosophical outlook. He compared his awakening to Buddha's, carrying this heightened awareness through life, perceiving suffering where others saw ordinary experiences. This recognition led to his disturbing conclusion: the world couldn't be the creation of an all-loving being. Instead, it seemed more like the work of a devil who created living beings specifically to delight in their suffering. For Schopenhauer, this wasn't pessimism, but reality without comforting filters. Consider your own experiences. Have you noticed workplace dysfunction or family problems that others missed, only to face resistance when pointing them out? This frustration of seeing clearly while others remain willfully blind mirrors what Schopenhauer experienced cosmically. Modern research supports this perspective. Studies show that people with higher cognitive abilities score significantly lower on measures of life satisfaction than those with average intelligence. What psychologists call depressive realism aligns with Schopenhauer's worldview, suggesting that more intelligent individuals possess a more accurate but less optimistic view of reality. Your sharper perception strips away comfortable illusions. Every silver lining comes attached to its cloud. Every solution creates new problems. Every institution reveals its corruptions. Do you sometimes feel alienated by seeing what others don't? You're not alone. The burden intensifies when you realize that seeing through social conventions doesn't exempt you from participating in them. You might recognize the arbitrary nature of social hierarchies while still needing to function within them. You might see through the illusions of fame or wealth while living in a world that values little else. This creates a painful double consciousness, living within systems you can see through. Schopenhauer experienced this firsthand. Despite his brilliant insights, his work faced significant marginalization from academia. His ideas clashed with prevailing intellectual trends, leaving him overlooked and dismissed. Imagine producing your life's most important work, only to have it taught in such a way that prevented you from being widely known, read, and followed. Pure intellectual isolation. The psychological weight becomes crushing when you recognize patterns others miss, but can't convince them of what you see. Your intelligence becomes a barrier, separating you from others who prefer comforting myths to uncomfortable truths. Each time you bite your tongue rather than point out the emperor's new clothes, each time you watch others fall for predictable manipulations. These moments create a unique loneliness that comes from being right in a world preferring comfortable illusions. Is your intelligence actually making you unhappy? Schopenhauer would likely say yes. Seeing the world more clearly often means witnessing more suffering, contradiction, and absurdity than others perceive. The clearer your vision becomes, the more isolated you may feel. The isolation of clear perception is more than just an unfortunate side effect. It's often deliberately enforced by society itself. What if the greatest minds throughout history weren't simply misunderstood, but actively silenced? The historical evidence paints a picture far more disturbing than simple miscommunication. From ancient Athens to modern corporate boardrooms, those who challenge comfortable illusions have paid prices far steeper than mere social discomfort. Our cultural narratives constantly reinforce the idea that fitting in brings safety and happiness. We're taught from childhood that conformity leads to acceptance. But Schopenhauer recognized a troubling paradox. The more honestly you perceive reality, the more threatening you become to those invested in maintaining the status quo. He witnessed this repeatedly throughout history and in his own lifetime. Consider Socrates, condemned to drink poison not merely because his ideas were unpopular, but because his questions threatened the very foundations of Athenian society. By encouraging young people to question authority and examine their own beliefs, he became a destabilizing force. His crime wasn't being wrong. It was being too perceptive, too willing to expose contradictions in the social order that benefited those in power. This same pattern continues with modern whistleblowers who expose corporate or governmental wrongdoing. Like Socrates, they often lose everything: their jobs, relationships, financial security, and sometimes their freedom. The message echoes through centuries. See too clearly, speak too honestly, and society will make you pay. What Schopenhauer understood profoundly was that societies throughout history haven't marginalized their greatest thinkers despite their insights, but precisely because of them. The rejection isn't accidental, it's a defensive mechanism. When someone points out that the emperor has no clothes, the typical response isn't gratitude, but hostility. Accepting uncomfortable truths often necessitates painful change. We collectively maintain comfortable fictions. Everyone gets exactly what they deserve in life. Hard work always leads to success. Our social systems are fundamentally fair. These beliefs function as protective barriers that shield us from confronting harsh realities about inequality, injustice, and the role of chance in human affairs. When someone challenges these narratives, our instinct is to silence them. In On Thinking for Yourself, Schopenhauer declared independent thought essential, arguing that reading is merely a surrogate for thinking for yourself. True understanding, he insisted, comes only through active engagement with ideas, rigorous questioning, and developing your own framework of thought. This perspective places him against the pressure to conform intellectually. Original thinking is dangerous, like stepping outside a narrow corridor where everyone walks comfortably in the same direction. Those who question deeply enough eventually find themselves at odds with conventional wisdom, facing the choice between intellectual honesty and social acceptance. For individuals, conformity might bring short-term comfort and inclusion, but at the cost of intellectual growth and authentic self-expression. For societies, the price is stagnation, blindness to genuine problems, and the perpetuation of harmful patterns. Problems that go unrecognized cannot be solved. The rejection often comes from those who would most benefit from listening. Environmental scientists warning about climate change, economists identifying market weaknesses, social critics pointing out systemic injustice. All provide insights that could prevent suffering if heeded. Yet these are precisely the voices most likely to be marginalized. The irony is that societies need independent thinkers to survive and thrive. Innovation, adaptation, and progress depend on individuals willing to question assumptions and propose alternatives. Yet these same societies consistently punish exactly the kind of thinking they most desperately need.
Radio Wisdom.
That profound contradiction, needing independent thinkers while simultaneously rejecting them, leads us to perhaps the most damaging myth of all. Society has convinced us that loneliness signals something fundamentally wrong with our character or social skills. We're bombarded with messages about the importance of connection, belonging, and community. Dating apps promise to cure our isolation, while workplace cultures emphasize teamwork and collaboration above all else. But what if this narrative is fundamentally flawed? What if Schopenhauer glimpsed a truth we've been conditioned to ignore? Schopenhauer directly challenged the equation of solitude with personal failure. In fact, he argued the opposite, that solitude is often a prerequisite for intellectual and spiritual growth. For him, the sages of society needed to consciously override their desires for social validation and embrace periods of separation from others. This wasn't about rejecting human connection entirely, but rather recognizing that meaningful thought often demands space, free from external influence and pressure to conform. The irony becomes apparent when we consider how society functions. We celebrate the fruits of deep thinking, the scientific breakthroughs, philosophical insights, and artistic masterpieces that move humanity forward, while simultaneously pathologizing the very conditions that make such contributions possible. The most transformative works typically emerge from minds that have, at least temporarily, stepped away from the constant hum of social feedback. History affirms this pattern repeatedly. Sir Isaac Newton developed calculus and his theory of gravity during plague-induced isolation at his family estate. Henry David Thoreau's retreat to Walden Pond yielded enduring wisdom about self-reliance. Solitude for these thinkers was not exile, but a crucible where their revolutionary ideas were forged and refined. Schopenhauer's own life journey illustrates this principle vividly. After years of intellectual struggle and limited recognition, he eventually found an audience who deeply appreciated his writings. Yet, rather than seeking constant social validation, he chose a relatively solitary existence, finding genuine contentment in his apartment with his beloved dog. This was purposeful solitude, the intentional creation of mental space for his philosophical work to flourish. His philosophy offered two primary solutions to existential challenges. Either embody the sage who transcends social pressures through thoughtful solitude, or engage deeply with art and philosophy as mirrors that help us understand life's complexities. Both paths require periods of separation from conventional social engagement, not as punishment, but as opportunity for the mind to synthesize, reflect, and create. The tension here feels almost impossible to resolve. We need thinkers who can step outside conventional wisdom to identify paths forward, yet the very act of stepping outside makes these thinkers vulnerable to feeling and being treated as outsiders. The isolation involves perceiving reality through a different lens than those around you. When you see patterns others miss, or question assumptions others take for granted, the resulting disconnect can feel profoundly alienating. Yet, what if we reframed this experience entirely? What if those periods of feeling out of step with others were necessary conditions for original thought? Schopenhauer recognized that truly seeing beyond social conventions requires mental space that constant social engagement rarely allows. The pressure to conform, to please others, to fit in. These forces constrain our thinking in ways we barely notice. This perspective doesn't romanticize isolation or dismiss the real pain of loneliness. Rather, it acknowledges that temporary separation from the social sphere serves a purpose in intellectual development. Perhaps the healthiest approach isn't choosing between connection and solitude, but finding a rhythm that incorporates both. Periods of engagement, followed by periods of reflection, community participation, balanced with independent thought.
Radio Wisdom.
So where does this leave us on our journey with Schopenhauer? Perhaps we can reimagine the experience of intellectual isolation, not as something broken within us, but as a natural byproduct of seeing beneath surface-level narratives. For modern intellectuals, Schopenhauer helps us recognize external pressures pushing us toward conformity. When we understand that many are driven by forces beyond their conscious control, we develop empathy while preserving our independence. People naturally resist uncomfortable truths. Yet Schopenhauer reminds us that genuine understanding emerges through our own reflection. So ask yourself, what myths are holding you back from intellectual freedom?